I did not think my own daughter would use me as the evening's entertainment. But that is exactly what happened the night my daughter stood on a lit stage inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel in Vancouver and told 200 of her colleagues that her mother was available for lunch starting bid $1. I can still feel the weight of that moment, the way the chandeliers above seemed too bright, the way the linen tablecloth felt too stiff beneath my fingertips. I was seated near the back, table 17, far from the head table where my daughter and her husband sat with the senior partners of her firm. I had pressed my navy dress that afternoon, curled my silver hair the way I used to when I still believed occasions like this were meant to include me. I was trying. I had always been trying. My daughter smiled into the microphone as though what she was about to say was charming rather than cruel. She said I was a retired seamstress with nothing but time on my hands. She said maybe someone could take me out for coffee and listen to my old stories. The room responded with a few polite chuckles, but most people looked uncertain, glancing at their partners, unsure whether to laugh or pretend they had not heard her. No one raised a paddle. The silence stretched on like a held breath, and I sat perfectly still, the way I had learned to sit still long ago when stillness was the safest response to humiliation. Then a woman's voice rose from somewhere near the entrance doors. $100,000. The room did not just go quiet, it stopped. I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next, because this story did not begin in that ballroom. It began long before, in the kind of ordinary life people rarely bother to write down. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and I grew up in a small town outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario. My mother sewed other people's curtains, and my father drove a delivery truck. We were not poor in the way that leaves marks, but we were careful with money, careful with hope, careful not to want too loudly. I learned early that certain kinds of dreaming were for other people. I married at 22 to a man named Gordon, who was steady and kind in the beginning, the way certain people are kind before life disappoints them. We moved to Vancouver when our daughter was 3 years old, chasing a job offer he never quite made good on. Gordon drifted in and out of work over the years, and I took on whatever I could. I had learned to sew from my mother, so I started taking alterations from the dry cleaner on 4th Avenue. Then word spread, the way it does in close neighborhoods, and I began making things from scratch. Wedding dresses, christening gowns, graduation dresses, the kind of garments people keep in boxes at the top of their closets for decades. Gordon left when our daughter, Stephanie, was 12. He did not leave dramatically. He simply stopped coming home one evening and eventually sent a letter explaining that he needed to find himself. I folded that letter, placed it in the kitchen drawer, and went back to finishing a hem that was due the next morning. Raising Stephanie alone became the organizing principle of my life. Every decision filtered through a single question: what does she need? I worked long hours, took in more orders than I could comfortably manage, and made sure she had new shoes every September and a winter coat that actually kept her warm. She was bright and driven in ways I quietly marveled at. By the time she left for university in Toronto, I was equal parts proud and hollowed out. She came back to Vancouver years later with a business degree, a husband named Trevor, and an ambition that moved through rooms like weather. She built a career in commercial real estate that climbed faster than I could follow. I heard about her promotions through brief phone calls and occasional texts. When she and Trevor bought their house in West Vancouver, she mentioned it almost as an aside. I told myself this was simply what success looked like from the outside. I told myself I was proud, and I was. But somewhere beneath the pride was a quieter feeling I did not let myself examine too closely. When I turned 63, I had been doing alterations and custom work from my apartment on Cambie Street for nearly 30 years. My back ached in the mornings. My fingers moved more slowly than they once had. Gordon had been gone for decades, and my social life had narrowed to a Wednesday evening church group and occasional visits with my neighbor, Patrice, who kept herbs on her balcony and never asked too many questions. It was Patrice who first suggested I look into selling my work online. I laughed at her. I told her I barely knew how to attach a photograph to an email. She sat down at my kitchen table, opened her laptop, and showed me anyway. We spent 2 hours that Sunday afternoon listing 3 of my hand-stitched quilts on a craft marketplace. I thought nothing would come of it. I went to bed that night expecting to wake up to silence. By Monday morning, all 3 quilts had sold. That small fact lodged itself inside me like a seed under cold soil. I listed more pieces, a hand-embroidered table runner I had made years ago and never given to anyone, a set of linen napkins monogrammed in a style I had developed myself over years of practice, a small wall hanging in a pattern I had been refining since the 1990s, when I used to sketch ideas in the margins of my order book late at night after Stephanie was asleep. The sales continued. Then the messages started arriving. Buyers asking if I took custom orders, a woman in Calgary who wanted a full set of embroidered pillowcases for her daughter's wedding, a shop in Victoria inquiring about wholesale, someone from New York of all places asking whether I had ever considered a licensing arrangement for my original patterns. I did not know what a licensing arrangement was. I looked it up on my laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where I had hemmed hundreds of skirts and let hundreds of deadlines blur into each other. I wrote back carefully, asked clarifying questions, and followed up with the kind of quiet diligence I had been practicing my entire life without anyone calling it a skill. By the end of that first year selling online, I had earned more than I had ever made in a single year of alterations. I did not tell Stephanie. She had never once asked about my work in any detail, and I did not see why this would be different. She referred to my sewing as my little hobby whenever she mentioned it to her friends. I had heard her say it more than once. I had learned not to correct her. I created a shop name that first autumn. I chose something simple, something that felt like me without revealing too much. Fieldstone Textiles. I liked the image. It suggested something old, something durable, something built to last through weather. The following year, I hired a young woman named Andrea to help manage orders and correspondence. She was 26 and studying design, sharp and enthusiastic, and she looked at my work with a kind of genuine respect that occasionally surprised me. She was the one who suggested I apply to a national juried craft exhibition in Toronto. I resisted for weeks. She persisted. I submitted 3 pieces. All 3 were accepted. One won best in category. I did not tell Stephanie about that either. A magazine article followed. Then a feature in a design blog that apparently had a very large readership, though I did not understand much about what that meant at the time. Andrea showed me the numbers, the followers, the shares, the comments from people I had never met saying my work was extraordinary. I read those comments at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, still in my dressing gown, and felt something shift in my chest that I could not quite name. It was around this time that Stephanie called with the request. Her firm was hosting its annual fundraising gala. Important clients, senior partners, major donors. She was coordinating everything and feeling overwhelmed. Trevor was traveling for work. Could I come stay for a week and help manage some of the logistics? Seating arrangements, vendor coordination, timeline management, the kind of organizational work she knew I was good at. Old habits have long roots. Of course, I said yes. I put down the phone, looked at the 3 open orders on my desk and the message from Andrea about a potential collaboration with a textile company in Halifax, and I packed a bag for West Vancouver. The week before the gala was the kind of work I knew how to do in my sleep, confirming flower deliveries, adjusting table assignments when a senior partner's dietary requirements changed, making 3 phone calls to resolve a conflict with the audio technician. Stephanie was grateful in the distracted way people are grateful when they are already focused on the next thing. She thanked me twice and spent the rest of the week in meetings. One afternoon, her husband Trevor returned from his trip and found me at the kitchen island going over the final program timeline. He glanced at the papers, then at me, and said something I have not forgotten. He said it was good that I had this to keep me occupied. He said retirement must be hard when you have been on your own as long as I had. He said it the way people say things they believe are kind. I smiled and went back to the timeline. The night of the gala arrived dressed in everything a Vancouver autumn evening could offer. The Fairmont's ballroom glittered. Guests arrived in long coats and good shoes, shaking off the last of the November rain. I sat at table 17 in my navy dress, watching Stephanie work the room with the kind of confidence I had spent her entire childhood hoping she would find. She was brilliant at it. I want to be clear about that. Whatever happened later, she had built something real, and I was proud of what she had made of herself. Dinner passed quietly. I watched the auction items go one by one: a ski weekend at Whistler, a private wine tasting, a signed jersey framed behind glass. The room was generous and warm with champagne and good feeling. Then Stephanie walked to the microphone with a wide smile and said she had one final item. She looked across the room, found me at table 17, and gestured in my direction. "This one," she said, "is a little different." She described me as her retired mother with a sewing hobby and plenty of time on her hands. She said I gave the best advice over lunch and that someone in the room deserved the experience. She said the starting bid was $1, and she said it with a laugh that invited the room to laugh with her. A few people did. Most did not. I kept my expression still. I had spent decades keeping my expression still. No paddle went up. The auctioneer looked uncertain. Stephanie's smile began to waver as the silence held, and the room grew the particular kind of uncomfortable that no amount of chandelier light can soften. And then, from near the entrance, a woman in a charcoal blazer raised her hand and said, calmly and clearly, $100,000. Every conversation in that ballroom stopped at the same moment. The woman was perhaps 45, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the unhurried posture of someone who is accustomed to being listened to. She walked toward the center of the room without any apparent urgency, and when she reached a point where everyone could see her, she turned to address the room rather than the stage. She introduced herself as Miriam Okafor. She said she was the acquisitions director for a national home and lifestyle brand that I will not name here, though anyone who has walked through a department store in Canada in the past decade would recognize it immediately. She said her company had spent the better part of 8 months trying to arrange a meeting with the founder and creative director of Fieldstone Textiles, whose original embroidery patterns and handcrafted textile designs had been shortlisted for an exclusive licensing partnership worth, she said, in the range of $400,000 annually. She paused. She said she had come to the gala this evening because her research suggested the woman behind Fieldstone Textiles was here tonight. She looked at me directly. She said she hoped $100,000 was sufficient to secure a lunch meeting. The room did not erupt so much as tilt. People leaned toward each other. Someone pulled out a phone. A woman at table 4 said the name Fieldstone Textiles aloud, and her husband said he knew that name. His sister had bought one of those quilts, and a third person said they had seen the magazine article. Had I seen the magazine article? And then someone found the article on their phone and held it up. And there was a photograph of me in my Cambie Street apartment surrounded by my work, and the caption read what it had always read. I watched Stephanie's face from across the room. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. There was something satisfying about it, yes. I will not pretend otherwise. But what I felt more strongly was a kind of grief, not for myself, but for the years we had both lost to a story she had written about me without ever checking whether it was true. Miriam Okafor made her way to table 17, introduced herself formally, and handed me a business card. She apologized for the theatrical approach and said her assistant had confirmed I would be here tonight and that given the difficulty in reaching me through conventional channels, she had decided to take the opportunity. She said my work was genuinely exceptional. She said she had been in acquisitions for 20 years and that the response to my patterns in their test markets had been unlike anything she had encountered. I thanked her and said I would have my associate Andrea reach out in the morning. I tucked the card into my purse, folded my hands in my lap, and sat quietly while the room sorted itself out. Stephanie found me near the coat check as the evening ended. The bright professional energy she had carried all night had gone somewhere. She stood in front of me in her heels and her careful makeup and looked for just a moment the way she had looked at 12 years old when she did not know how to say she was sorry. She asked why I had never told her. I considered the question genuinely because it deserved a genuine answer. I told her that I had mentioned my work many times over the years and that she had called it a hobby and changed the subject, and that after a while I had stopped offering information that was not wanted. I told her this without anger, because by then I did not feel angry. I felt tired, and I felt clear. She said that was not fair. I said gently that I agreed with her. She came to my apartment on Canby Street 3 days later, not dressed for a meeting, not carrying her work phone. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table she had eaten breakfast at as a small girl, the same table where I had sewn and sketched and planned and rebuilt over and over, and she stayed for 2 hours. She asked me to show her the shop, the patterns, the correspondence, the exhibition award. She held the award in both hands for a long time without saying anything. Then she said she had been carrying a version of me in her head that she had never actually checked against reality. She said she was ashamed of that. She said the moment at the auction, and here her voice broke slightly, was something she would not forgive herself for easily, and she did not expect me to forgive it quickly either. I told her that I loved her. I also told her that I would not be available to organize her events anymore, that my work required my full attention, and that if she wanted to be part of my life, she needed to be interested in who I actually was, not who she found it convenient for me to be. She nodded. She did not argue. We sat together for another hour, and she asked me questions she had never asked before, about the patterns, where they came from, what I was working on next. I showed her a piece I had been developing for 6 months, a large textile panel based on the topography of the Lake Superior shoreline, the kind of landscape we had both grown up within reach of. She looked at it for a long time. She said it was extraordinary. I believed her. The partnership with Miriam Okafor's company moved through contract stages over the following months. Andrea managed most of the correspondence and flew to Toronto twice for meetings I attended by video call from my kitchen table. The licensing agreement, when it was signed, carried a number that I still sometimes find difficult to look at directly, not because it is beyond what I deserve, but because for so long I had lived inside a story where numbers like that were simply not available to someone like me. I kept the apartment on Canby Street. I kept the Wednesday church group and the visits with Patrice, who brings her herbs inside in October and makes a soup that smells like the end of summer. I kept my morning routine, coffee, the table, the work. The work had not changed. Only the world's awareness of it had. What had changed, and what I want to say clearly because I think it matters, was something inside me that I had been slowly dismantling for years before any of this happened. The belief that my life was the background of other people's stories rather than the story itself. I had started dismantling it the day I listed 3 quilts on a website because a neighbor with herbs on her balcony told me to try. I had kept dismantling it through every rejection and slow month and moment of doubt. The Gala simply made it visible in a room full of people who had not been paying attention. If you are someone who has spent years being useful to everyone except yourself, I want you to hear this. That usefulness was never the full measure of your value. It was a chapter, not the whole book. The work you have quietly done, the skills you have quietly built, the dreams you have quietly carried through decades of practical demands, those things are real, even when no one in the room can see them. It is never too late to let them be seen. And if the people closest to you have written a version of you that no longer fits, you are allowed to correct the record. Not with bitterness, and not by waiting for a ballroom full of strangers to do it for you, but in the quiet, consistent way that has always been your strength, simply by continuing to be exactly who you are until the world catches up. If this story stayed with you, I would be glad to hear why. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and if you have ever been the person sitting at table 17, I want you to know that I see you, and I believe in what you are still becoming.